Welcome to Module 2 of Effective Public Speaking, Effective Presentation Formatting. In this module or session, we will focus on key elements to the visual presentation development process. Did you know that effective and consistent formatting in documents and presentations show organization and consistency among a department and/or team? In this session, I will give you some things to think about and consider as you perform in your varying roles in the department and as you begin to standardize how public speaking will look and sound in your department. Remember, you want the audience to focus on what you present, not on the way you present. So I just mentioned that I would give you some things to think about and consider as you perform in your varying roles in the department and as you begin to standardize how public speaking will look and sound in your department. It is important to follow the Spring Independent School District brand and have a branding scheme of your own that bridges Spring and your department. This slide is just one example of what one might see as the reoccurring Spring ISD slide items shown within the district. These are the key imperatives from our strategic plan, and we include the slide in each presentation we give. So you just took a look at this slide in its generic standpoint, but right here, this is the one that we use when we are presenting on behalf of workforce development. So I want to share with you an example of how you can switch it up, change it a little bit without modifying the integrity of the document to meet the needs of your department. In our departmental presentations, we usually keep this generic running head at the top that sums up the goal of the work presented in our professional developments, or PDs, and how that fits into the scope of the model presented on your screen. So you may think as a team or department which tenets highlight the work you do and the information you desire to put out. And when I say tenets, I mean the 5 tenets on your screen in the center in that circle. Excellence in every school, engage stakeholders in every community, reach every student, opportunities and choice for every family, high performance for every employee. As we serve as coaches, specialists, and professional development facilitators through our work, our aim is to ensure that we help our teachers and the leaders we come into contact with reach every student, ensure there is excellence in every school, and that each person is performing highly, putting their best foot forward each and every day. In doing so, can we work to meet the needs of every child? So I want you to think about, again, how can I craft this frame, this slide, this document to meet the needs of the output of my department? Another effective consideration is a goals slide. In all of our presentations, we include goals. It is important to know where your end goal is and/or what is the expected outcome of what you are presenting, and that you share that with your audience so they know as well and can easily follow in the various segments of the presentation. Goals assist with the flow and help to ensure that we are staying on topic, are focused, and that we have something to accomplish. In any speech or presentation, there should be at least one goal, aim, or objective. I usually try to aim at no more than 3 goals. However, in a few seconds, you'll notice that this session in particular has more than 3 as it is meaty in the outcomes. As you prepare your speech or presentation, it is important to ask yourself, what do I expect my audience, listeners, or participants to walk away with or gain from my message? Again, write this down if you didn't. It is important to ask yourself as you create and craft your presentation, what do I expect my audience, my listeners, or my participants to walk away with or gain from my message? I now want you to take a moment to notice how the goals on the screen are listed. I like to highlight or bold the verb in my goals. It signifies what we are going to do with the information presented or with the portion of information on the screen. It also makes the display more easier to read, it separates the information, and is more visually appealing, in my opinion anyways. When it is consistent, your audience will automatically know what to look for and how to decode it. Let me say that again. When it's consistent, when your formatting is consistent in each presentation you give, whether it's you always presenting or whether it's anyone in the department presenting on behalf of course, the department. When that is consistent, when your formatting is consistent, your audience will automatically know what to look for, where to look for, and how to decode it. As we carry on, we will look at more ways to make text more easier to read and visually appealing. Oh, and I know, in a speech or setting where you are speaking to the media, you may not have a visual display where you can post your goals, right? Even still, goals should be established or created in your plan to assist with ensuring you and your ideas are focused. When creating my goals, I think about the purpose of my PD or meeting that I'll host, and I'll begin outlining the information or the flow of the meeting or professional development. Once I have an outline or clear idea of where I want to take my audience, I then create my goals. You may decide that you want to create your goals before you start constructing your speech or presentation, and that is perfectly fine as well. No matter the order, it is important to, once goals are written, to reference them throughout to ensure the information that you are presenting matches the goals that you have outlined. Previously, I discussed the purpose for learning goals. As you may recall from our first session, we had goals that were reviewed and, of course, accomplished. On your screen, you will find what we will accomplish in this session. We will explore considerable standards to adapt for effective visual presentations. In this session, you will be exposed to a number of components or visual standards to consider as you come together as a department to collaboratively or individually construct your presentations for audiences to participate in. We will also discuss ways or view ways to enhance your creation process. We will talk about and I will share items to consider to make the information presented creative when delivered. We will also discuss or I will share acceptable clip art. We will review elements of what makes clip art or images visually appealing and effective to support the message and what elements are visually unappealing and distract the audience from the message or information displayed. We will also practice components of each expectation. Lastly, throughout, we will practice each and end with an implementation task to apply all of the learning. Again, I want you to notice the verbs and notice how they are bolded, showing what we will be doing, exploring, discussing, and practicing, and the rest are the various skills you will learn and experience. So, take a few seconds to pause and think about how you might display session goals or objectives in your department. Once you are ready, go ahead and continue on with the learning. Okay, so we have reviewed and thought about two things thus far. The first, Spring ISD branding and its importance, and secondly, session goals and objectives as a focus. Let us dig, however, a little bit deeper with focusing on the visual aspect and beginning with fonts. Your font, in many cases, will be the bulk of your presentation. This is because fonts are all of the written information that will be shared or communicated to your audience. The choice in font is very important and can make or break the message and it being clearly and visibly received. So again, the choice in font is very important and can make or break the message and hinder it being clearly and visibly received. Let us take some time to explore why and review what to consider when including text in our presentations. Font style. So I previously mentioned how font can make or break your presentation. If there is text on the screen, your audience is going to want to or is going to be expected to read it, right? If that is the case, we want to ensure we are selecting a font that is designed to have an easier readability. In typography and lettering, a sans serif or simple sans letter form is one that does not have extended features called serifs or lines, or sometimes they're even called feet, at the end of strokes of letters. Sans serif fonts tend to have less stroke width variation than serif fonts. They are often used to convey simplicity. Notice the example presented in the bottom right corner of your screen. You will notice the serifs on the lettering highlighted on the left. Serifs are any other embellishments made to lettering. These embellishments, when used with a lot of words on the screen, can make it difficult for viewers, especially those with more complicated eyesight or who are in a large audience where viewers may view a screen from afar. Other acceptable typefaces that do not use serifs or small lines at the end of characters include Helvetia, Avant-Garde, Arial, and Geneva, just to name a few. Other serif fonts to avoid include Courier, Century Schoolbook, Palatino, and Elephant, to name a few. They may look nice, but when combined with a lot of text and images, it may be difficult to read a word, or the words on the screen may become jumbled. So again, they may look nice, but when combined with a lot of text and images, it may be difficult to read, and the words may become jumbled. We also want to consider the average eyesight of all viewing the screen. According to most studies, sans serif fonts are more difficult to read. For this reason, they are used most often for short text components such as headlines or captions. In our settings, it is best to err on the side of caution and avoid them altogether. You do not want to sacrifice readability for style. Adding to the idea of font selection, here are a few other items to consider. Choosing the right font or fonts and combining them is like matching an outfit. You need different clothes for different events and occasions. Typography makes a first impression that influences the rest of the design. With the help of a font, you can affect how the reader feels, how they click on certain ideas, or how they focus on something. I'm sure you didn't think font played that big of a role in your presentation, but it does. On your screen are a couple of things that I'm going to go over. So first, italics are hard to read on the screen. In most cases, italics are sometimes used to highlight text. You should limit, however, the use of italicized text because they make letters on a screen difficult to read, especially when it is overused. A tactic to consider is to use italics sparsely. One italicized word or phrase per slide, if necessary, is acceptable. You, as the creator of the presentation, are in control of the visual presentation. As we go through this session, we want to constantly think about the goal, and that is to make it visually appealing, easy to read, and to not hinder your audience from the written and spoken message. Next, normal or bold fonts are easier to read. When considering your font, consider if you want to bold every word on the screen or leave it in its normal state. I will mention color usage in a few moments, but when I use a colored text other than black, I often bold the whole text, everything. I often bold my text to ensure that all words can be easily read. If you choose to not bold your font, you may consider using bold to highlight or emphasize a certain word or phrase, to make it pop, to make it stand out. The next, when you use underlines, those typically signify hyperlinks. Usually when you want to include a link to a video or a document to open, you will notice an underline under that text. The use of unnecessary underlines can be confusing for the audience or presenter, especially if you created the presentation for someone else to present or co-present. So think about how you can use another tactic to emphasize a point as opposed to underlining it for emphasis. You can bold the text, or what we will review next, include the use of color to provide the emphasis that you would have done if you chose to underline. So lastly, it is better to emphasize words and phrases with colors. So the culminating idea we can take away from this is font style can be best used to emphasize or highlight information that we want to stand out or that we want our audience to pay close attention to. When you think about color choice, you want to consider colors that will be the best in any type of lighting on any screen. You do not want to choose a color that may be too light, too bright, or too distracting. You may have appropriate colors for your department, as do we, that we use in all of our presentations. If not, the Office of Communication has created a wonderful color palette for us to use and choose from that meets the approved colors that match our district brand. I will share that with you on the next slide. So, consider bold or appropriate colors for making the information on your slides pop, as opposed to the overuse of italics and underlines. I will add that you do not want to overemphasize or overuse the bold or the color function on your screen as well. Everything is not of importance. You do not want to decorate your screen. Remember, we are wanting to inform them and pull out certain pieces of information to highlight. Everything is not necessarily highlight and noteworthy. Adding on to the idea of font styles, it is important to note that you should use a limited number of fonts because using too many different fonts on the same page could clutter your design. It is also not a good idea to change your font styles mid-talk. Many times, people might change their fonts in order to emphasize something. However, remember, stick to the guidelines that I suggested on the previous slide when emphasizing by bolding or changing colors of the text. I would also suggest to keep the same one or two fonts for the whole presentation. Maybe consider one font style for your title and one font style for the body of the slides. However, the use of different font styles on the same page on differing lines should be avoided. So what that means is for one bullet, you shouldn't use one font, another bullet or line, use a different font, another bullet or line, a different font, and so forth. You also want to avoid the use of capital letters. The use of capital letters makes text hard to read. Think about if you had a screen full of capital text. How difficult would it be to follow along and understand all the information that is displayed? The use of unnecessary capital letters also conceals acronyms. We know that generally when we use capital letters, we are using them for an acronym, especially in the educational sector. An acronym, for example, SISD would be all capital, and that acronym stands for Spring Independent School District. If you use unnecessary capital letters, it makes it difficult for your audience to identify which is the acronym and which is just simply you spelling out a word. And if you are using capital letters to emphasize something, it denies the emphasis. It kind of makes it less than. So you want to avoid that by only using capital letters when you need an acronym because they are difficult to read and difficult to decipher. You also want to avoid the use of bolded and or italicized small text. Using small text or a small font size is already difficult and straining on the eyes. Imagine having to read a bolded text or a slanted text at its smallest state. With all the hard work and preparation that you have put forth to put together a powerfully meaningful presentation, you want to ensure that none of the message is lost, that your hard work does not go unnoticed as a result of something you could have avoided. The only time to consider using small text is a footer. Small text is unnecessary when displaying the information. So you want to remember, if you can control it, something like the text size, make it large enough for everyone to see. In your Black Course Resources folder, I have attached the Spring ISD Brand Standards Manual, I want you to reference pages 25 through 27, so pages 25, 26, and 27 for information on the Spring ISD font expectations and regulations. Since we have been talking about font size and how it can be difficult and straining to the reader, it is important to note and add that you do not want the font to distract a reader from the message that you are sharing. I know I may have mentioned this a few times already, but as we know, consistency is key, and I want to give you a consistent message that I am driving here. Your audience should be able to easily read the words written on your design the first time around. With that being said, you need to choose a readable font style, especially if you are placed in a position where you must use a text that is small. There are a few ways you can increase your font's readability. The first is size. We have been talking a lot about font size. I know this may seem like a common sense point, but you will be surprised how often font is not considered, or how often font size is not considered. Creators throw content on the screen and do not reflect on its readability. They are only worried about the information that is being shared. Obviously, the bigger the font, the better it can be seen and read. However, sometimes you need to use small text for a banner, and that is okay. Then you can increase readability by using a horizontal scale. Play around with font spacing if you need to place text in a small box, but still you need to keep it visible. The larger, of course, again, the better. Remember, your slides must be readable even at the back of the room. Notice on your screen how even font size 28 can be a little difficult to read depending on how much information you may have on the screen or the location of your viewers. The font I am using in the presentation varies between 32 and 40. The smallest I tend to make my titles are size 40. Most of my titles in the slide are size 44. So in addition to using size, you also want to use space. And space is the distance between letters. That matters. So think about how much spacing you want to default your words to be to ensure that your text is not jumbled up. You also want to think about height. This is another parameter you can manage to keep the text readable in a limited space. You might not want to bundle or bunch up all of your words right under it. Typically, I'll do a multiple line space or a 1.5 line space to ensure that I'm maximizing height and space and that my words aren't all bunched up together. Just to put things in perspective, take a moment to view the readability of this slide. I know I just said this, but again, I want you all to see the importance of this message. The larger, the better. Remember, your slides must be readable even at the back of the room. Notice the first bullet. This is a good title size. I am using Arial 44. The second bullet, a good subtitle or bullet point size can be Arial 40 or 32. And then notice my third bullet. Content text should be no smaller than Arial 32. I think about the less words on the screen I have, the bigger I want my text to be. I want to fill up my space and I want to ensure that the message is readable. This last bullet, anything below this font size is not recommended for content. This is Arial size 16. Arial size 16. So think about the readability, and I want you to kind of think about what are some size points that you want to use as you begin to create your presentation, or when you create your template, what are the size ranges that you want to use. When thinking about the appearance of the presentations you give, consider the following. The standard guideline is to have no more than 6 lines of text in the headline on each slide. This should allow you to use a font size of 32 point to 36 point. Text should be in a single font style and size. Generally, a sans serif font such as Arial is good. Think about the list of sans serifs that I presented to you at the beginning of this session. To help with this, you might consider limiting each slide to one idea and use bullet points to cover components of each idea on that slide. Again, you want to avoid abbreviations and acronyms if necessary. However, if you are using them, make sure you explain or spell them out to your audience so they can understand and follow along in the message. Building on the previous idea, there are times when you may want to incorporate the use of bullets in your presentation. Over the next few moments, I will share with you guidelines to consider when implementing the use of bulleted lists. You use the same type and same style of bullet through the presentation unless the change signifies necessary. It is so important that you are consistent throughout everything you do in your presentation. So that doesn't change with bullets. So use the same bullet on the page, but more importantly, if you use one bullet on one slide, you need to use that same bullet style on the next slide and the next slide, or whenever you choose to use bullets again. When using a bullet and when placing information on the page, it is important to consider the 6x6 rule. This will help us to ensure that not too much information is on one line and on the screen at any given time. Remember, we want to ensure readability. So 6 words per line, no more than 6 lines per screen or per slide. You also want to keep the information on each bullet to one line, 2 at the most, with one thought per line. So you don't want, your bullet is meant to show short, brief information. So one bullet shouldn't be the whole page where it's 5 and 6 lines. You want to keep your bullets at 1 to 2 lines. You also want to limit the number of bullets on a screen to 6, or if there is a large title or a logo or picture that you want to include. We do not want to crowd the screen. If you crowd with too much text or too much media, the audience possibly won't read it or they may become overwhelmed. Too much text looks busy and it's hard to read. Why read it when you as the presenter are going to tell them what it says? Remember, our reading speed does not match our listening speed. Hence, this is why they confuse instead of reinforcing. So you want to ensure that you don't have too much on the page so they have time to read what's on the page or on the screen or on the slide, as well as listen to what you have to say about what is on the slide or screen. So with everything, you want to be intentional and purposeful with what you are using. The proper way to use a bulleted list is currently displayed on your screen. You use a bulleted list when you have information that does not need to be prioritized when it is implemented, when you have information to share and the sequence in which the information is shared is not important, and when the information does not have a hierarchy attached to it. That is when it is best and most appropriate to use a bulleted list. Now, as I am sharing this information, you may begin to think, well, if it is not a bulleted list, what else is there to use? I will get into that on the next slide. But before we advance, notice how the use of color was used to emphasize or make a word pop or stand out to make a point. The word that I emphasized was what? Yes, without. I want to make a point of highlighting or pointing out when used the tools and components I'm sharing with you, because I want you to see and know that I use those also. It's not just me sharing you what's effective, it is me using also what is effective. Without was highlighted because bulleted lists are used when you have information that is without priority, without sequence, or without hierarchy. So As I've been stating, the key is to ensure that the tools, the components, the elements that we are using in our presentation to make it look great, to make it be more effective, should be used in a purposeful and meaningful manner. So I just asked you, well, what else could we use besides a bulleted list, right? Well, you could use a bulleted list or a numbered list. You would use a numbered list when it is not appropriate to use a bulleted list. Numbers symbolize and or represent order. So it is important that they are used for those instances to avoid confusion. When you are sharing information that is meant to be shared or completed in a specific ranking or hierarchy or sequence order, you want to use numbers on the screen, and remember to not include more than 6 words per line and no more than 4 to 6 numbers per screen. Of course, there are exceptions and differing tricks to this, but the goal is to always remember and take into consideration the readability and to not display too much information at one time to overwhelm your audience. On your screen, you have an example as to how a numbered list may be used. So you may include information when you enter the campus. You might be having an orientation or a debriefing with your staff or with your team on what are expectations when they enter a campus. So you would share, when you enter the campus, whenever you go to ABC Middle School, there are a couple of things that I want you to do. Notice how I'm not reading everything from the screen. I have the important information displayed, but I'm also talking through my thought process and my expectations. That is what makes an effective presenter. Anywho, I know we discussed that the last session, but of course, I'm always spiraling and bringing back information because I want you all to see how it can be used purposefully, intentionally, and to make your presentation better. So you have your information on the screen, and then you have your numbered list, and your numbered list is the order in which they are to complete it. So they're going to enter the campus. Once they enter the campus, you may want your team members to display their badge, then you want them to sign in, and then you want them to head to their duty spot or their station. This is the purpose of a numbered list. In a bulleted list, you might just have, these are all the things you do on campus, and they may be in any order, no specific order at all. But when you have a numbered list, you want to ensure you have it in order in the steps or procedural. So now we are talking about your labels and headings. You want to ensure that everything is consistent. Your labels and headings should look the same on each and every slide. And as you notice or have reflected on, or even if you haven't noticed, pay attention throughout the course of the rest of this session and notice how my labels and my headings are consistent throughout. They are the same font style, they are the same color, and generally are the same size depending on how much information I have on the screen. If I have a little bit less information on the screen, I tend to go a little bit larger, maybe about 44. If I have a lot of information on the screen, I'll typically have it at 40. Neither here nor there, you will notice that there is consistency and continuity across all slides. Additionally, you want to use the same background on each slide. I mentioned about a template, and you'll notice how I have the same background on each slide. Some slides may vary. If I have a chart, I might have a blank background, or you may see an emblem in the left-hand corner, but I have the same background because I'm coming from the same template. It is not the best idea to have, for example, you see this background currently on your screen, and then the next slide you might see a red background with curtains, and then on the next slide you might see black and white and red and green for, fireworks, for example. You do not want to, and you should not use multiple backgrounds in your presentation. Changing the style is distracting. With that being said, it is important to develop, again, a departmental presentation or come together as a team to decide on what is the acceptable standard background that you will use in each of your presentations. So even if you do not meet with the communications department to create your own Spring ISD Police Department template, Look at the templates that come within PowerPoint that are your default templates, and which one looks the cleanest, which one looks the most crisp, which one has the most acceptable font styles. And if they don't, come together as a team, as did we, and decide on which fonts do you want to use in your documents. So that is acceptable. Again, as I mentioned and alluded, if you work with the communications department on branding, then your headings and labels will be already embedded in your template because they will create a template for you. Or you can be creative and innovative and create your own standard template, and they will always be there for you. I strongly urge you to meet with Chief and decide what you all want to do. If you decide to go with the branding through spring, that is wonderful. Everything will be done for you. If you all decide that you want to come together and streamline your own format, I'll be more than happy to assist you in whatever I can to make it easier and just worry-free. In all, it is important to be consistent in what you do and in how you present. So we have reached our first practice activity. This is practice activity 1. We have discussed a number of things. So in this activity, we are going to apply some of the things that we have learned thus far and then receive a little bit of feedback on your implementation. You are going to be expected to create a 3-slide PowerPoint that does the following. It should introduce yourself and hobbies or things that you enjoy most. I've been working with you all for a little bit over 2 weeks now, and I kind of want to get to know you just a little bit. In the event that I see you or you see me, you know, can say, hey, I might ask you something about your pet or not. But anyways, I do want you to introduce yourself to me just so I can learn a little bit about you, and I'll do the same. You will also share 2 to 5 things that you value or enjoy most of or about your presentation, about your job or your position. So share with me a couple of things that you truly enjoy or value from your job or your position. Keep saying presentation. And then lastly, I want you to create a slide PowerPoint that shares what you have learned or reflected on during this season of COVID-19. Now I'm having you to do this to practice a couple of things that we have learned. And so reference your notes or rewind, but we have talked about a number of things. We've talked about font styles and font size. We've talked about the use of bullets and numbers. We've talked about the use of, or just the correct way to format your lines, the 6x6. We've talked about headings and subheadings. So I will be looking for the implementation of all of those things. Every slide should have a heading. It's up to your choice, or a title. Up to you if you choose to have a subtitle. Be mindful of your fonts. Be mindful of your bullets. Be mindful of all the things that we have reviewed, and use that to guide your implementation of that in your PowerPoint. Once you have created this PowerPoint, you are going to go to the practice activity 1 in the blue course assignments folder, and it will give you instructions on how you are going to submit that to me for review. Once you have submitted it, I want you to come back to the learning. So at this time, I invite you to pause your screen and work on your practice activity 1. Submit it how it advises you to do so in the blue course assignments folder. Once you have submitted it, come on back and join in on the learning. See you in a bit. We will now take some time to explore the elements of effective implementation of design and graphical images. Take a moment to read the heading on this screen, on this slide that's currently displayed on your screen. This seems to be the word for the session, right? In all that you do when presenting, you want to be consistent. You know the material and the intent, you created or have studied it, but remember, your audience does not know the content of your message. So you want to ensure that you are consistent in your efforts, as I previously mentioned, so that the message is not lost. Even with your design use and graphic selections, everything that you do is consistency is important because lack of consistency takes away from the message and can lose your audience. So differences in your presentation draw attention. When they see different fonts, when they see a different background, it draws attention. You want to use things that stand out, your graphical elements, your transitions, your animations, only to push or signify that something is important. The use of surprise elements should attract your audience to want to look and to hone in on something. It should not distract them. So you want to think about being purposeful, you want to think about intentionality, and you want to think about consistency when you are including things in your presentation to be creative or to make the information stand out. So just a couple of things to note that I will kind of breeze through, but your layout is important, and being consistent in your layout again is important. And I know it may seem that I am beating, what is the phrase, a dead horse with a stick, but it is important, especially if creating presentations is not your strong suit, that you hear these things over and over again so that it becomes like muscle memory whenever the time comes for you to do these things. So layout continuity from frame to frame conveys a sense of completeness. So when things look the same, when your layout is the same, it shows that you are orderly, it shows that you are purposeful, it shows completeness. So things to consider is your indenting. Do you indent at the same spot on each slide? So if your bullets should always be in the same spot. If you press tab to indent one time, you should press tab to indent one time on each slide. What do your headings and subheadings look like on each slide? Where do your logos typically show up on each slide? Your headings, your subheadings, and logos should show up in the same spot on each frame, and they should pretty much look the same. Use the same font, use the same color, or use the same graphic if you are talking about the same topic or idea for a number of slides. In the Black Course Resources folder, you will find the Spring ISD Branding Standard Manual. I am including that for you to look through. I want you to pay close attention to the page numbers on your screen as they relate to headings, subheadings, and logo implementation into your presentations. Building upon the previous information, margins, fonts, and font size and colors should also be consistent with graphics located in the same general position on each frame. So you want to think about your margins. They should be the same. You want to ensure that typically your font is the same. The font is the same. The font style is the same on each slide. I talked about that, having a certain font in the header, or title, and then having a different font in your body. So you want to ensure that you have those two fonts and they're the same throughout. Your font size should be the same throughout. So I mentioned to you, generally my font size for my titles are 40 or 44, same throughout. And then in my body, my fonts is typically 40 or 38 point size, same throughout. You want it to be consistent. You want the text to be in the same spot each time. I don't know if you noticed in module 1, but when I had a quote or when I had something for you to reflect on, it was centered in the middle each time. If I had bullets, my bullets are always square. I love those bullets, and they are in the same position. And so those things matter. They seem like small, minute things, but those things matter. Detail matters. Also, your color should be consistent with the graphics. So you want everything to go together. You don't want your colors to clash. If you are a well-dresser, a great dresser, a fashionista, or if you have a keen eye for the small things or for decorating, this may be something that you might find joy in, or may be easier to you if you just notice things. But you really have to have a keen eye. It's more than just slapping words on the screen, typing it up, but you want everything to look good, to sound good. You don't only want to spend time preparing all this information to speak well, but you also want it to look well on the screen as well, and so that it's not distracting, or the information that you're speaking doesn't get discounted or discredited because what's on your screen looks a mess, right? So your color should be consistent with your graphics. So for example, if you have an image on the screen, like I mentioned, you don't want the words, whatever font style, whatever font color you chose, to clash with the actual graphic that you have. And again, you want it to be in the same general position each time. An inch or two off or a centimeter or two off isn't bad, but again, you want it to generally be in the same spot so your audience gets into the habit of knowing where to look. Adding to that, lines, boxes, borders, and open space should also be consistent throughout. So you shouldn't have text on the left side on one slide and then text on the right side on another slide. You want it to be consistent throughout. Line transitions. This is another thing that can make or break. It can be distracting or add to and give value to your presentation. Typically, when you are transitioning a line, I usually use appear or fade. A simple wipe left to right for a bullet point is good, but a move or fly, for example, is too tedious and slow. So I typically have all of my information appear on the screen at once. It's just easier. If I know that my participants are going to have to take a lot of notes in a live session, I might have one bullet appear at a time. So for example, where it says use same style throughout, I'll have that appear, and then a couple of seconds later, a simple wipe left to right is good will appear. Subdue your previous bullet to emphasize the next one. And so sometimes I won't have all of them come up at the same time. I'll have it come in later because I want it to build on, or I want it to give them time to reflect on it before I add it. I don't want all of it to come at once. When adding in transitions in animations, I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but simple is better than extravagant, okay? Less is so much more. So when thinking about line transitions, that is, do you want all of the information to come up at once, or do you want it to appear line by line when you click or after a couple of seconds? And typically just appearing from left to right is good, or just clicking appear or fade is good. You don't want to do the window and the windshield wiper slide line transition or the dissolve. That can be a little bit distracting, and also, like I mentioned, it can be a little slow and tedious because you're waiting on it to load and come on the screen. So think about simple is better, less is more when you are considering implementing line transitions, if that is something that you desire. Line transitions. This is another thing that can make or break. It can be distracting or add to and give value to your presentation. Typically, when you are transitioning a line, I usually use appear or fade. A simple wipe left to right for a bullet point is good, but a move or fly, for example, is too tedious and slow. So I typically have all of my information appear on the screen at once. It's just easier. If I know that my participants are going to have to take a lot of notes in a live session, I might have one bullet appear at a time. So for example, where it says use same style throughout, I'll have that appear, and then a couple of seconds later, a simple wipe left to right is good will appear. Subdue your previous bullet to emphasize next one. And so sometimes I won't, like I mentioned, I won't have all of them come up at the same time. I'll have it come in later because I want it to build on, or I want it to give them time to reflect on it before I add it. I don't want all of it to come at once. When adding in transitions and animations, I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but simple is better than extravagant, okay? Less is so much more. So when thinking about line transitions, that is, do you want all of the information to come up at once, or do you want it to appear line by line when you click or after a couple of seconds? And typically just appearing from left to right is good, or just clicking appear or fade is good. You don't want to do the window and the windshield wiper slide line transition or the dissolve. That can be a little bit distracting, and also, like I mentioned, it can be a little slow and tedious because you're waiting on it to load and come on the screen. So think about simple is better, less is more when you are considering implementing line transitions, if that is something that you desire. Adding to that, slide transition. So transitioning from one slide to the next. If it is absolutely important and relates directly to the content and the topic, that is the only exception when doing some extravagant slide transition. Your slide transition should not be a cute enhancement. It should be purposeful. So typically, I will just use the fade, or I would just do none, and it'll just simply click over. And so you'll notice as I go to the next slide how it fades. I like that one. It seems classy, it seems really nice and modern and just nice looking, clean, crisp. So I typically use the fade option. Okay, so now we are going to spend a few moments talking about graphical images. We have taken a moment to talk about logos, we've talked about everything fonts, we've talked about font style, font color, font size, consistency, and continuity throughout. Now let's take a moment to look at graphical images, because we like to use these images because they draw in our audience and give them something to look at, something to refresh their eyes. However, when including the use of images, you want to ensure that you are using high quality images and high quality graphics. Graphics like clip art and cartoonish images are okay, but you want to use them sparingly. You want to ensure that whatever you are choosing adds to the message. It doesn't take away from the message. We've talked about this throughout. Everything should be purposeful and intentional and add to and not take away from. And you want to think about, what does it look like on the screen? Paste it in and then open it up full screen and see, what does it look like? As with anything, you want to ensure that your audience can see and read your graphical images clearly. So take a look at what is on the screen. You want to use high quality graphics only. They should be clear, they should be crisp. You want to avoid using clip art if possible. So aim to use stock images. So Google stock images. You can find many real world images that may look like the topic or idea that you are trying to get across. you want to use the same image style in your presentation throughout. So if you use a stock image, you want to try to use stock images all throughout. If you use those little grayed out, kind of like, they're not emojis, but for sake of, because I'm not sure what it's called, but they're stock images too. You might use these little emojis. You may choose to use a clip art. Use it all the way throughout. You want to try to make sure that all your images are roughly around the same size. You don't want one slide where it is itty bitty 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 tiny, like a wallet size image, and then you have another slide where it takes up the whole screen size. And then just some things to remember: a graphical image should include a relation to the topic, or it should enhance the topic. And this is my biggest pet peeve when I'm looking at images on a screen: it should not have a watermark or pixelation. So if you find a picture that is too small and you stretch it, it's going to look pixelated and have like little squares and just looks really distorted. Or if it may have a watermark where it has those little like swirls in the middle or a gray line throughout, that means it's not legally yours to use. So go and find pictures that do not have watermarks and that are clear. I want you to think about, for example, now we live in the HD TV world, the smart TV world, the 4K world, where everything is clear. Have you ever looked at your favorite movie from way back when? My parents and my grandma loves Westerns, so we look at old Westerns all the time, or just TV shows that were written and produced in the early the mid 1980s, 90s, before then. And you kind of see how, if you were to watch that same movie then and then now, how it looks, or just that same movie then and then another show now, how it looks so much different. That is how, when we choose the wrong pictures, how it looks. It looks like we found a photo from the 1970s and it's blurry, it is not clear, it looks like someone wasted water on it. And when you can find one, that same image, if you just take your time, that is more clear. It has more quality. It's of higher quality. So I said all that to say, when you are including images and videos, you want to take the time to find one that is clear and that is appropriate. We want everything to look professional at all times. So think about those and keep those in the forefront of your mind as you are searching for graphical images to include in your presentations. We have now reached another moment of practice. This is now practice activity 2. You earlier in the session submitted practice activity 1, where you were introducing yourself to me and sharing a couple of things just so I can kind of get to know you a little better. Using the same PowerPoint from practice activity 1, I want you to locate one acceptable and one unacceptable image for each of your slides. I want you to find an image that is great and one that is not so great, that signifies something that you mentioned on your slide. So what it is going to look like is, you submitted for practice activity 1 a 3-slide presentation. For practice activity 2, you are going to have a 6-slide presentation. So slide 1 might have been your introduction and you told me about yourself, your hobbies. On slide 2, I want you to include 2 images. One that is acceptable and one that is not acceptable. So the images won't necessarily be on the slide, because depending on how much information you shared, you may not be able to fit both images on there. Once you have your images, so that means you are going to have 6 images total. You are going to go in the bottom in the notes pane, and I want you to justify each image. I just want you to tell me why you believe one is acceptable and why you believe the other one is not acceptable. So to rewind, you began with a 3-slide PowerPoint. You are going to end with a 6-slide PowerPoint. On slide 2, on slide 4, and on slide 6, you are going to have 2 images. One image is acceptable, one image is not acceptable. You will also share with me a sentence or two, a couple of sentences, nothing too long, but please make sure you are answering incomplete sentences, practicing that grammar. You are going to justify or explain to me why you believe one is acceptable and why you believe the other one is unacceptable. And to make it easier, put the acceptable one on the left, the unacceptable one on the right, or put the acceptable one at the top and the unacceptable one at the bottom. And just share with me what about it is acceptable based on the guidelines that you learned that I shared with you, and what about it makes it unacceptable. Got it? So at this time, I invite you to prepare to pause your screen, head over to the blue course assignments folder where you will find this task. It will also give you information on how to submit this task. As always, if you have questions, do not hesitate to reach out. I will be on standby to answer your questions as soon as I can. I try to do it in an expeditious manner. So at this time, I invite you to pause your screen, take care of your assignment. Once you are done, submit it, and then come on back and return in the learning. See you in a bit. So you have heard me mention colors throughout the course of this session here and there as a way to emphasize or make things pop or stand out. I want to just spend a few more moments with you on particularly color scheme and its importance. So just really focusing solely on colors. The primary, secondary, and tertiary colors define and maintain the visual identity of our district's brand. When creating presentations and charts and graphics for presentations, there are certain colors or tints that we are expected to use that meet the needs of our district brand. In your course, Black Course Resources folder, I am including for you the branding handout or the branding document to look through. And I want you to pay close attention to the page numbers on your screen, as those will focus on what the expectation is for various colors that we use, various fonts that we use, and when trying to find images, you want to try to stick to as close as possible finding images that meet or have those colors in them. Depending on the lighting in the room, dark room, then dark background and light text, but light on and bright room, which is advisable, white background with black or dark text works much better. So again, depending on the lighting in the room, if it is a dark room, then you want to use a dark background and light text, because if you use a light background, it's going to blind your audience. So if it's a dark room, you want to do more of a darker background, a gray or something of that sort, and a lighter text, a white. But if you have the lights on or a bright room for most of your presentation, you want to use a white background with black or dark text. That works better and is more softer on the eyes. Research says cool, such as blue and green colors, work best for backgrounds as they appear to recede away from us into the background. Warm colors, such as orange and red, generally work best for objects in the foreground, such as text, because they appear to be coming at us. However, I want you to be mindful in all of your selections. Be mindful of colors that are not suitable for color blindness, like red and green combined together. Always check your presentation on the screen prior to the presentation to check the color appearance. So I always, once I'm done, go live screen in my office or my projector and just look at what it looks like. And I want you to think about how many of our buildings are a little bit older. So some screens show better or worse than others. So always be aware of where you will be presenting, look at how it looks, and then adjust as necessary. The following are our templates, but I wanted to show this to you and give you something to consider as you all reflect and think about what your template is to be. So we're talking about color scheme. I know this is our workforce teach up color palette, color scheme, color template, but I wanted you all to see the expectation and see an example, an exemplar, so you kind of know how to move forward as you work as your own individual team to create your own color scheme and branding template. When creating charts and graphics or presentations, we use these colors or tints of these colors. Again, as you think about creating your own color scheme, this is something to consider and to adhere by. Again, when creating charts, graphics, and tables, this is what we use. So I just want you to kind of see what this looks like. Continuity and consistency. Now, let's take a few moments to see how video and sound can impact the effectiveness of a presentation. When considering implementing a video in your presentation, you want to think about the same considerations mentioned when inserting a photo. Those being ensuring that the video that you are implementing, has high quality visual, and high quality sound. You want to make all videos the same size. You want to use full screen if possible and ensure that it is large enough on the slide to view. And you want to think about, just as I mentioned before with photos, you want to ensure that it is relatable and that it enhances the topic of the slide. It should not have a watermark or be pixelated to where you cannot see it. And it should show to be a concrete example of or explanation of the thought or the topic at hand. You want your videos to push the thinking of the audience or solidify the topic or issue presented, not to confuse your audience. I also mentioned on that previous slide that it changes the pace. And all that means is it gives them something else to look at or think about as opposed to just simply looking at or listening to you speak. It rejuvenates them, it awakens them, it just kind of switches gears a little bit. So, sound effects. When you are giving your participants something to reflect on, for example, you might want to include a sound effect where they might have like a couple of seconds to think about something, or you might have them get up and move around to some music. There are small instances where sound effects are appropriate and are necessary. Timers, for example, when you have a break and it solidifies or it signals when your presenters are to return back is an appropriate example. So sound effects can distract your audience throughout your presentation, so you want to use them sparingly. You want to use them only when they are necessary. Generally, when you use sound effects outside of videos, it is for a timer, just to keep your team or your group of people on task. Sometimes people use music, light music, instrumental music when they are entering in, but again, you want to ensure that it is not distracting to the greater good of your audience. So I want to begin to bring us to a close with a few general presentation reminders. It is very important to know your audience, be cognizant, be aware of your audience that you are presenting to as you create your presentation and as you plan the tasks, the activities, the content within your presentation. Always check your spelling and your grammar within things. I know we are educators or we are professionals and we know how to spell things, but sometimes we get in a rush or there are so many ways to spell certain things, there. You want to ensure that your spelling and grammar is correct. Feel free and be open to collaborating with others and receiving feedback from them. Sometimes it is difficult to admit when you are wrong or once you are invested in a topic to have someone to come in and change it, but build a team, build a family, build camaraderie amongst your peers and go to them and have them to look at your presentation with a blind lens. We have been working on this training or this presentation for a great deal of time and you've seen it over and over again, so it makes sense to you. Allow someone who hasn't been working with it, who hasn't seen it, to look at it and to give you some feedback on things that they love, that things that they see are effective, and then also things that they would change or consider to do a little bit differently. Use a timer. So in my sessions when we are live, I put timers on the screen so my participants know how long they have to work on a specific assignment, and it keeps them on task. It keeps them focused, and it also helps me to honor the time set forth for the session. Practice before you present. I mentioned this in session 1, but it's so critical, it's so crucial. Practice before you present. And then, of course, less and simple is more, and it looks so much better and cleaner than just overwhelming amount of information, animations, etc. on your screen. You have reached your final practice activity 3. We are building on everything that has been submitted. You are now going to edit your 3-slide PowerPoint that you initially began with. So in practice activity 1, you began with 3 slides. Practice activity 2, you expanded and ended with 6 slides. For practice activity 3, we're going to take it back down to 3 slides. You're going to edit your 3-slide PowerPoint. It should introduce yourself and hobbies or things that you enjoy most. It still should share 2 to 5 things that you value most in your job or your position. And it should still share what you have learned or reflected on during this COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, I wanted to include at least one acceptable image on any slide of your choosing. And I also want it to include, one acceptable image or graphic or video. And then it also should include an acceptable use of bold, italics, or color, or you can use all 3 sparingly throughout. So I want to basically see you apply the principles, the elements, the components, the practices that we have learned throughout our session. So again, taking it back down to 3, I want you to include at least one acceptable image or graphic or video. And then I also want you to include an acceptable use of bold, italics, or color. I want to see a title, of course. I want you to be cognizant of your font size and font style. So I want you to take into account everything that you have learned and create for me a short 3-slide effective presentation. Again, you do not have to have any recordings included. I just want to see what it looks like. So at this time, I invite you to pause your screen, head over to the blue course assignments folder where you will see the expectations for this assignment as well as how to present it. How to submit it. Once you have done, submit your assignment and then come on back over and finish up the learning. See you in a bit. You have now reached the end of Module 2. I want to take the time again to thank you for your attention, your engagement, your cooperation, and your participation in all of the tasks you were required to submit. I want to remind you again that you are to submit 3 activities, activity 1, activity 2, activity 3, and then you're also to upload a survey just for my growth and development as well. Once you have uploaded all of those things, I will award you credit for session 2. And last but not least, I want to remind you to be on the lookout for correspondence via email for information regarding session 3. My contact information is on your screen right now, so if at any time you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free, as you already have been doing, reaching out to me and I will respond to you as soon as I can in the effort to meet your needs. If there are no questions or if you have questions, again, reach out to me. Otherwise,